Ray Cronin, the founder of Club Benchmarking, and Frank Cordeiro, the COO at Colonial Country Club in Fort Worth, Texas, co-wrote an insightful piece in the November-December issue of Boardroom magazine called A Peek into the Future of the Private Club Industry Using Demographics and Data. It was the data in the piece that really caught my attention, especially the information that connected the U.S. population with the ebb and flow of club membership over time. So I reached out to Frank to talk about this piece in greater depth, and we covered a lot of ground. We talked about how the success of clubs today is more a part of a cycle than it is an actual validation of club strategy, and the need to make decisions proactively using data instead of just assumptions. I also wanted to hear his perspective as the COO of one of America's great country clubs. Here's my conversation with Frank Cordeiro. You're listening to Crushing Club Marketing, a podcast for progressive club leaders ready to increase their club's revenue. Time for change begins right now. Well, Frank, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to meet you in person, or at least through video. I guess, I'm wondering, I love the piece in Boardroom Magazine. I've got it right in front of me, actually, that you co-wrote with Ray Cronin from Club Benchmarking. How did that whole thing come about?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Ray and I have been friends for many years. I met Ray when he was first starting Club Benchmarking, and when the kind of work that he does wasn't really widely accepted in our industry. And so he and I share a passion for informed decision making. And unfortunately, up until the time Club Benchmarking was established, we really didn't have a quality resource for data. And so Ray and I developed a quality relationship early on, and we've collaborated every year since. I've had, I think, 12 to 15 consecutive annual board orientations that Ray's been an integral part of. And so every year, at a minimum, once a year, we get together and collaborate on important messaging, and we spend a full day with my board. And again, we've been doing that for 12 or 15 years. And recently, we were discussing demographics and its impact on the industry. And Ray, as usual, had some very great insights, and I shared some of mine. And I said, you know what, this is really good information. We should write an article. And Ray said, you know what, great idea. Let's do it.
Yeah. Well, it's terrific. And if you're listening to this, you haven't seen it. It's in Boardroom Magazine. I don't have it was the November-December issue of 2025. Correct. And it's called A Peek into the Future of the Private Club Industry Using Demographics and Data, which of course is right up Club Benchmarking's alley. But let's just jump into this. I'm wondering, there's so many club leaders today that have really benefited from the pandemic and post-pandemic boom. And there's, as so many clubs have invested, and you guys sounds like you've got some capital projects going on as well. But for so many club leaders, they feel really good about their club. But what do you think is the most important thing that they might not be paying attention to right now during this time where things are going really well?
Yeah, it's not, in my view, it's not just one thing. In the article, I focused on complacency during peak times. And, that's I think a bigger and more important issue or challenge, if you will. And we've seen that not just in the private club industry, we've seen it across all industries. We all know the stories of companies like Kodak, invented the digital camera. Where are they now? On the retail side, Blockbuster, Toys R Us, and Sears. There are multiple, Nokia, BlackBerry. The list goes on and on. These were companies that were leaders in their respective industries and were thriving. Some because of their technology, their innovation, the quality of their leadership, but also some of it timing, and demographics and other kind of external things outside of their control. And what
Mhm.
happened in each of those instances were different kinds of what I would consider to be um, examples of complacency.
Mhm.
And they all now are either um, in a different organizational form or don't exist.
Mhm.
And all of that because of complacency. They basically were a victim of their success. One of the principles I live by is no failure or success is permanent. And what I mean
Mm.
by that is everybody knows that when you fail, you got to get back up and work hard to compensate. What people don't realize is when you have success, you have to work even harder than when you fail. And most people, including those companies, get it wrong. And so when I think about our industry and I think about prior booms and busts and what we're currently going through, I see a level of complacency potentially setting in. And things like innovation, things like quality experience, things like looking forward and planning for the future um, tend to lose focus and lose attention. And we become reactive rather than proactive. And we don't adapt
Mhm.
like those companies and those examples that I gave you. So part of looking at what we addressed in that article was, look externally, look beyond COVID, and look at what are the success factors? Why is your club doing well? And if it's purely demographic, if it's purely related to what has occurred post pandemic, then when things change, and they will, because we all know business and demographics and everything else that we look at externally, they are cyclical. The things that are now being masked by boom times will start to reveal themselves. And the question
Mhm.
for the leaders in our industry is, are you ready for that? And you have to be right now asking the right questions and looking at the right things, which means looking beyond the current boom.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you position a lot of that and the boom times breeding complacency, and it's that idea in a way that almost like in the some of the conversations I've had with some people is that it's like we've arrived, we've done it, we're here, like we've gotten over the hump.
Yeah.
We used to really struggle, and now we've got a wait list. Like we've done it. We've like there's some magic formula that they figured out, and really it's probably it's as we know, I mean, you look through the trends over time, it will change again soon, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought that just that I loved in the piece was the was how you guys were mentioning the fact that, between 2000 and 2017, when the industry was in a decline, a pretty steady decline over that time, and that the idea was that pricing was actually the problem, but when in fact it wasn't necessarily the pricing at all, was it?
That's correct. And that's a good example of uninformed decision making. And that occurred during an era before we had data readily available to us. And really before, I think, as an industry um, and as a mindset within our industry, we looked at things externally. And
Hmm.
so we came to conclusions that if you were to go back, as we did in retrospect, and looked at the data, the conclusions that many in our industry came to were absolutely incorrect. And the issue that we focused on, or the conclusion we focused on in the article, was there was a trend in our industry during that difficult era of reducing the initiation fees,
Hmm.
and there was a tremendous focus on dues. Um, Said another way, people were focused on pricing versus experience.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turns out, as an industry, we had it all wrong. It was really a demographic issue, not a pricing issue. And one kind of anecdotal example, I was at a club in the Los Angeles area during the 2008 recession.
Mm-hmm.
And what we saw in our little local market was the clubs that were the most expensive clubs that had the newest and best amenities were doing the best. They separated themselves. There was what we in our little circle referred to as a flight to quality.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of the clubs were all competing on price and circling the drain
Mm-hmm.
because they became less competitive because they had less resource.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just got worse for them. And some of those clubs ended up closing. Yet the clubs, again, that were not focused on price, but were focused on providing a quality experience and were in fact more expensive, were benefiting because the people at those clubs that were declining and looking for a better experience were going to the better clubs. That's why we called it a flight to quality. And so the
Mm-hmm.
clubs that distinguished themselves with a better offering, with better value, with better experiences, with better facilities, were in fact thriving despite what was happening externally, and at that time, specifically, a worldwide recession.
Right. How much of that, since you lived and worked through that period, how much of that though was that, in every market, you've got some clubs that are just like bulletproof. They'll always command a high dollar initiation fee, and people are always going to join them because, for so many, a section of our world that, whatever the initiation fee doesn't matter, but it's those other second tier, third tier clubs that are like, gosh, we don't really have that. Was that happening? Was that why, that sort of flight to, better experience, how much of a factor did that play, do you think? You know
What
what I'm
you're
saying?
doing with that
Yeah.
question is actually shining an even brighter light on the importance of data and informed decision making versus making assumptions
Hmm.
based on anecdotal information or experiences, because the data that you would see in a platform like club benchmarking would clearly demonstrate that the dynamic of providing a superior experience and providing a better product and providing better value is not exclusive to that small subset of our industry. If you
Right.
study the database of over 1,000 clubs, you'll see that clubs that follow certain patterns, that invest in certain ways, whether it be, level of amenity, broad services, quality facilities, newer facilities, innovative products and programming, et cetera. If you look at clubs that are within that larger subset, they are succeeding.
Hmm.
The clubs that are not are struggling or in fact failing. And so again, the benefit of having data is we can see based on our business model and by studying certain metrics that there is a pattern, there is a recipe, there is a roadmap for success, but you have to be asking the right questions and looking at the right data and being able to analyze and interpret that data correctly.
Hmm. On that note, I think one of the interesting things that I saw, and what really caught my eye as it relates to the conversation about the decline from 2000 to 2017, is the sheer number of Gen Xers that were probably in that time coming. I'm one of them that were
Mhm.
coming into that time of like considering club, and the actual population
Yeah.
was actually down. It was like the pool of opportunities of prospective members was actually considerably less than the number of boomers that were there. And now the number of millennials and, the Gen Y, the Gen
Mhm.
Zs that are now, in that position. I'm just wondering, like, given that and knowing that there's this huge number of Gen Y, Gen Z people that are now becoming your new members, the 40-some-year-old members. Um, how do you adjust your programming and amenities? Like, what do you think in what you've seen at Colonial as far as like the right way to adjust that? Because in the article you talk about these in real life experiences and the fact that families are seeking outdoor activities and that quality time together. How do you adjust to attract those people, knowing that we now have a bigger pool of prospective members that are out there?
So again, a great question, from the standpoint that, today's leaders, it's not about having all of the answers. It's about asking the right questions. And you just ask the right question. What will those demographic groups seek in their clubs? What kinds
Mhm.
of experiences, what kinds of amenities do they want to see in their clubs going forward? And that's a very different approach than thinking that the boom time was related to COVID and that we can just keep doing the things that we're doing now and expect that because demographics are favorable, that will be a recipe for success, a roadmap for success for the next 20 years. But to do that would be to ignore that each one of those generations that you're referring to, the millennials, the Gen Zers, and even the Gen Alpha, if you look at what will they want in the next 20 years, it's going to be very different than us as Xers or boomers. And if
For
we
sure.
don't anticipate those things correctly and don't adjust accordingly, then we will not be well positioned to take care of that demographic. We're going to miss out on that opportunity.
Right. So how are you addressing that? Like, as a club leader and, the COO at your club, how are you leading your board and how are you leading the members to maybe reframe some of this stuff that as we're talking about? What are you guys doing at Colonial?
Well, first of all, um, long-term planning and creating a culture of looking forward. And most people would refer to it as strategic planning, and it certainly is a form of that. But it's really more a culture of looking forward and
Mhm.
planning accordingly. And so this is actually also another red flag, and one of the reasons why we wrote the article, because right now, during this boom, clubs have additional resources and have large waiting lists and have the conditions where they can invest in their amenities. But
Mhm.
most clubs are looking at essentially replacing amenities they already have,
Mhm.
and they're utilizing what members want today as the basis for those decisions. But if you consider that it takes 3 to 5 years of planning and then 3 to 5 years of building, by the time that has run its course, your membership demographic has already changed.
Mhm.
And what you've essentially done is built a club for yesterday versus a club for tomorrow. So
Mhm.
having a culture where you're actually looking forward is a big part of that. And obviously that
Mhm.
falls into if you were to look at the discipline, that's your governance discipline. So let me give you a specific example at Colonial. We're a club that's almost a century old. We have a PGA Tour event that's this year will celebrate its 80th consecutive year. So we're the oldest and longest running PGA Tour event in history. So
Well,
we're a very
congratulations.
golf oriented, traditional club. And yet, just a few minutes ago, I was saying we were forward looking. And two things can be true at the same time. And that is an
Right.
example of that. And so, specifically, when we're looking at our clubhouse that was built in 1957, we've looked at our current demographics, and we've also looked at the demographic of our prospective member going forward. And what we found is that, generally speaking, our members are coming from a 3-mile circle around the club. They're between 35 and 50. And at least one, and more than 50% of the time, there are 2 working professionals in the home,
Mhm.
and at least one of them works remotely full-time or part-time. And so we've taken one of our dining rooms and we're converting it into a shared workspace with a juice bar and cafe. So basically, your Starbucks and a juice bar combined in one, with a social workspace, with breakout rooms for remote meetings, video, Zoom, those kinds of things, and an executive boardroom. So we're creating
Mhm.
a shared work environment so that our members can not only play at the club, but also be productive and work at the club. That's not
Mhm.
something that you would expect in a club that's been around as long as we've been around and that is so golf focused and championship golf focused. But we're looking forward and saying not where we've been in terms of the golf history, but what is the current demographic joining the club? What do they value? What lifestyle and professional shifts have occurred? And does our program, our campus plan, address that? And
Mhm.
in many of these instances, it's not about um, instead of, but it's in addition to. We will continue to be the home of championship golf. We will continue to bring the best golfers in the world to our club. But in addition to that, when the PGA Tour isn't here, the member that lives a mile away and works remotely can come to the club, get a workout, play a round of golf, and have a productive business meeting, all in the
Mhm.
same location. So that's an example of looking forward and understanding how lifestyles, behavior, and today's member, what today's member is looking for in their club beyond golf,
Yeah.
beyond rackets, beyond the obvious.
What I love about what you're saying is that, a lot of the amenities that you're talking about, the juice bar and the workspace, you'll see more and more clubs doing that. But one of the things that I love about the way you position this is just that clubs are making these updates, right? And it's easy to get in that mindset of like, let's just update what we have. And even if it's like the pool, right? Like, well, let's just build another pool.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like every decision, every update that you make, that's not like the HVAC system or the irrigation or whatever. Maybe that does give you the same thing, but it's like it gives you an opportunity to look at it a little bit differently, to plan for that next generation, to see further down the road. And if you're bored and if the leadership at your club is not thinking that way, then as you said, you're going to be building that club it's going to be
Yesterday.
3 years outdated by the time it's done, right?
Absolutely.
That's pretty cool. I'm just wondering, how have you handled that challenge? And you pointed out in the article as well, the generational challenge, like I should say the old time, but the legacy members who have been at the club for years, and the newer members and what they want. Like, how do you, knowing, from what we're saying, knowing that you want to be able to plan for the future, but you're going to have a lot of old guard that's like, well, whoa, 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 that's not how we do things here. How
Mhm.
have you managed that? What's been the right approach for you at Colonial?
Yeah, I think, again, as an industry, we're such a small niche industry, and we kind of have a tendency to um, put ourselves in a little bit of a box. And as a result, we tend to kind of see things the same way and not evolve in our thinking. And so I've heard this question presented in a lot of different ways, framed in a lot of different ways. But most of us in our industry say the same thing, which is we've got multiple generations within our club, and they're not necessarily looking for the same things, and that is a dilemma. So the older members want tradition, they want what they've always had, and then the younger members want something different. And how do you deal with that dilemma? Some of that is true, but I think in order to have success, you have to look at that in a different way. For example, rather than looking at what separates or what those two generations don't have in common, how about looking at the things they do have in common? Because if you start to look at it through a different lens, as opposed to that box, you start to
Mhm.
see things differently. You start to think differently. Like, for example, my children all have their phone either in their pocket or in their hand or somewhere close by. If I walked into my dining room right now and looked over the dining room, or if I went out into our fitness center, anywhere in the club, and looked over and saw somebody that's in their 30s or 40s, and then looked to the other side and saw somebody that was in their 70s or 80s, I guarantee you they both have a phone nearby.
Sure.
There
Yep.
isn't a person at this club that doesn't walk through this facility, this campus, without the phone in their hand.
Mhm.
Um, People adapt to the environment. People adapt and evolve to what's going on. And so rather than starting with what separates them, start with what unites them.
Mhm.
And it's just a different way of looking at things. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a very golf centric, very championship oriented, very traditional um, aspect to our club. It's really our identity. It's what we're known for.
Mhm.
Um, However, that doesn't mean that we can't do things in addition to that.
Mhm.
And the traditional golfer who joined the club originally because the golf course was well known and it's a championship golden era golf course, and that's the style of golf course that they love. Um, I can see them on a Saturday morning enjoying that golf course, but then on a Friday night attending our chef's table, because guess what? The 70-year-old loves wine just as much as the 30-year-old. They have
Right.
that in common. And there's 100 other examples, not just the two that I gave you. I think in our industry, sometimes though, we look at things in that box, in that proverbial box, versus thinking differently. And here, in the last 5 years, we've transformed this facility. We've spent over $100 million. Every single aspect of our
Wow.
campus, including our golf course, has changed, and it's been embraced across generations because we've looked at what unites them, not what separates them. We
Yeah.
looked at what they have in common, not what they not what they see differently.
Right. Yeah. What's that perspective is so is so good, and from the standpoint that it's um well, let me frame it up this way. It seems like a lot of times, club staff, club leaders are in a defensive mode, right? Someone's not happy. How do we make them happy? Someone's not happy. And so there's a lot of time that's spent on trying to make people happy. And so it's easy, I think, to see what's wrong. They don't like this. They don't like this. We tried that. That's not, they don't like this. And so you end up saying, oh my gosh, how are we going to get these two groups together? But what you're saying is so true. It's like they're at the club because they do have a lot of shared interests. I mean, the
Mhm.
truth is they really do appreciate the same thing. So focus on that and lead in that way rather than reactively, right? I mean, that's
Right.
in some ways, is that fair?
No, it's absolutely fair, and it also goes along the same lines of looking forward, and it all falls into the same category and discipline of governance. And
Right.
I mentioned how, we try to think differently. We look at what unites people, not what separates them. We tend to look forward. And the other piece is what you're hitting on, which is this: proactive versus reactive.
Right.
That's really
Yeah.
the key, is proactive versus reactive. The other is this, which is also I think a secondary point that you're making, which is the vocal minority versus the silent
Right.
majority, something we all know very well. That was a transformative thing that occurred here at Colonial. There was a very vocal minority driving decisions at the expense of the majority. I'll give you an example. this tournament that I mentioned that's been around for 80 years. Um, Anecdotally, people would share with me in my first several months here that um, many of our members resented the tournament and didn't support the tournament because it was disruptive, because
Shut the golf course
it
down.
shut the golf course down, and all the
Yeah.
reasons you might imagine. And so as a result, um, Frank, you're new. What do you think? Should we continue to do this? Should we do it a different way? And so they were asking me to make changes, substantive changes, um, financial, traditional, um, things that really, really mattered based on assumptions, um, without any real true data,
Hmm.
and based on what they were hearing from a vocal minority. So, as part of our process of governance, we went, we studied this, and we looked at member sentiment, and we surveyed and we did focus groups. And what we found out was that over 90% of our members, saw value in the tournament and supported it wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? Yeah. It's almost like
So, being proactive and actually ensuring that you're looking at true data versus the vocal minority can be the difference between success and failure. Even I've mentioned our club's been around for 100 years. Many of those companies that I mentioned been around 100 years. You start asking the wrong questions, you start making assumptions, you start being reactive versus proactive, you'll cease to exist.
Yeah. I was gonna say it's almost like that employee, the group of employees that are really unhappy that make a lot of noise that boy, they're it's a squeaky wheel thing. And
Right.
what you end up doing also is chasing away some of the better people, which can also happen, at clubs.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what you do just in the spirit of being proactive and reactive. And you mentioned this in the article as well, just, the lead and lag indicators,
Right.
which I'm a huge fan of, and so often, at our club, even, we'll hear there's a lot of attention on, what our NPS scores for different things, which is great data and great information to have. But at Colonial and in your experiences as a club leader, I mean, you've got a lot of years doing this. What are some of the are you able to share some of the lead indicators that you rely on when you're trying to make decisions or, on an operational basis? What are the lead indicators that you tend to pay attention to the most?
Well, one is what we discussed earlier with how have lifestyles changed? What's happening, in society, societal changes, behavioral changes, cultural changes that are occurring. And a lifestyle change that was also a professional change that we observed was this dynamic of people who are joining this club live in our community, and most of those people work remotely.
Mhm.
So that was a demographic shift. That was a societal shift that we could see coming into our club, analyzing, the new members and the prospective members. And so we use that to create something within our club that is not by any stretch a traditional amenity. And
Mhm.
so there's really 2 points here. One is what I've just described, which is looking ahead and adapting to that and evolving to that, um, versus reacting to it.
Mhm.
The other is just kind of a mindset of innovation
Mhm.
and of actually creating and establishing trends versus just reacting to trends. And that's what I meant
Mhm.
in the article. Our industry is tend to allow somebody else to be the innovator, and
Mhm.
then we ride the coattails.
Right.
And in some respects, that works because at least we are eventually evolving to that trend. but there's incredible power and success to being first. And again, I think as an industry, I would love to see our leaders within the industry take on a mindset of an innovator, of trying to be first versus following. And I'll give credit to a peer, a colleague of ours who did this in a way that I thought was very innovative. And in fact, I tried to discourage him from doing it because I thought he was making a mistake, and it turned out to be a great success. And this was J.J. West at Monterey Peninsula Country Club. He had worked at a club in the East Bay near Diablo Country Club, where I was the GM at the time. The prior GM had retired, and JJ was promoted to the general manager COO position, and he was fairly new to his position. And he shared with me that he was basically going to turn his F&B, his food and beverage model, on its head and basically do essentially a cost plus 10 model, and that he was going to pay for that deficit with dues. And long story short, I asked JJ if he liked his job, and he said, "Why do you ask?" And I said, "Well, if you want to get fired, then do what you've just described, because that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You got most of your members don't live within the community, and so they're not there to enjoy that amenity." And I gave him 10 different reasons why being innovative and why trying something new was going to get him fired. And again, trying to make a long story short, he ignored me, which was a good thing. And he turned out to be right, and I turned out to be wrong, because it turned out to be, for his club, that turned out to be a game changer. Since he made that change, his initiation fee increased, membership demand increased, his wait list got larger, and member satisfaction went way up. So that's an example of being innovative, being bold, and winning in a big way. And now many of us, including myself, have benefited not necessarily from that specific model, but from a similar model, and being able to demonstrate to leaders at our club that providing value with amenities as part of our business model is a successful recipe. And so again, example of not only not being reactive, but truly being innovative and being first.
Yeah, it's almost like that mindset of that leader to say that is just how I operate, and show up to work every day with that sort of innovative mindset. You write in the article, and just a couple more questions for you, but I want to make sure we talk about strategic and operational governance, and the fact that, you were writing that really clubs need to embrace this. Can you just go into that a little bit, and why is it so important? What is it, and why is it so important?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. Most people confuse strategy with goal setting, and get strategy all wrong to begin with. And what do I mean by that? If you were to review, not just in the club industry, but in industry in general, review their strategic plan and review their mission statement, vision statement, value statement, they all look pretty much the same. We are going to be the finest, fill in the blank. We are going to provide world-class service, fill in the blank. That's not a strategy. At best, that's a statement. But in reality, it's not even a unique statement. It's the same statement that's made in a different way at every organization across all industries for decades.
Sure.
So that's number one. Number two, it's a list of tasks, a list of objectives, and a list of goals. That may be very helpful in some respect, but I would argue it's very, in terms of value, it's very limited, and it's not even in the same conversation as strategy. None of those things I've just described are strategy. Yet, if you look at most strategic plans for most companies, including clubs, that's all that they entail. And there is
Hmm.
little to no strategy. And in the club business specifically, normally what you see is a capital plan. It's usually people are using the strategic plan as a way to rebuild the things that they already have. So
Hmm.
basically, they spend a lot of money and they basically have they have new things, but they're the same things that they had before. It's just a newer version of the same thing.
Sure.
That's not strategy. That's not innovation. That's not planning for the future. So, kind of big picture, I think people don't understand strategy and what
Hmm.
strategy actually is. That's number one. Number two, clubs like Colonial tend to operate in 30-day increments and 12-month increments. There's an annual business plan driven by the annual budget process. That's the 12-month
Hmm.
cycle. The
Hmm.
30-day cycle is, oh my gosh, there's a board meeting coming up, and the 2 weeks prior to that, there's a series of committee meetings coming up, and so
Sure.
clubs operate in this perpetual 30-day cycle and 12-month cycle. Well,
Hmm.
by definition, that's not strategic.
Hmm.
It's it's a 12-month increment. At best, it's a 1-month business plan. And
Sure.
so you have to change the behavior, you have to change the culture, you have to change the process such that the people that are involved in those processes are not thinking in 30-day increments and 12-month increments. They're thinking in 3-year, 5-year, 10-year increments. So
Hmm.
it's a process and leadership and governance change from micro to macro, from tasks and goals and objectives to true strategy. So one's kind of it's a structural governance change that needs to take place so that you can even have a chance at true strategy and true innovation.
Yeah, I love it. Um, Last question for you, and I'm just you've experienced a lot. You've had you've had leadership positions at several clubs now. Um, and I'm just wondering what you would say to the GM who's listening to this saying, "Hey, you know what? We're doing great. We've got a wait list. Everything is good right now." Like, what's the best piece of advice that you could give to someone who's, sort of feeling like they've arrived?
Yeah, it's been kind of the overarching theme in our conversation, which is be proactive, not reactive, be strategic, um, and look forward. That's it, and don't be complacent.
Hmm.
I think for me, it's something I try to remind myself of every day. No success or failure is permanent, as I mentioned before. One thing that we know, and I think this article clearly demonstrates, is there is tremendous opportunity for the private club industry going forward. Our marketplace is growing. If you look at supply and demand, it is very favorable. What happened during the boom with the baby boomers was we overbuilt, and then the demographics went the other direction.
Hmm.
And so we basically had a dual dynamic, both of which were negative, and there's no way you can succeed under that environment.
Hmm.
What's happened now with this boom is the favorable demographic is there, but we have not overbuilt.
Hmm.
And so I would argue that in my lifetime, um, the best opportunity in our industry is ahead of us. However, if we're complacent and believe that it's purely demographic, that it's purely a dynamic of changes that have occurred as a result of a pandemic, and that wait lists will be there forever, we've got it wrong. Just this month alone in the Wall Street Journal, there were 2 articles about non-traditional clubs that we will be competing with.
Hmm.
There's social clubs in big cities like New York and Newport Beach, California, and smaller markets like Savannah,
Hmm.
Georgia, where um, private equity and other investors like Goldman Sachs have seen what's happening demographically and have seen the demand among these younger generations for social connection. And they're investing in non-traditional social clubs, kind of the Soho Club model.
Mm-hmm.
And also, one of the two articles focused specifically on luxury hotels converting traditional spaces into private clubs within the hotel.
Interesting.
And so what we think is our competition right now, what we think the marketplace will want is going to change in the next 5 to 10 years. And if we look forward and adapt accordingly, and we're first versus reacting, then we have an opportunity to truly thrive in what I believe will be the best conditions we've seen in our industry in our lifetime.
Yeah, I love it. It's scary too, though, isn't it? I mean, for a lot of general managers that are out there, I mean, putting your neck out there and being innovative, it sounds great, and I'm pumped up after listening to you. And at the same time, there are a lot of people saying, "Geez, but if this doesn't go right, like JJ, I'm getting fired." And that's a serious pull, right? I mean, how do you get past that? I mean, you're either wired that way or you're not. I mean,
No, I think it's leadership is being bold, and leaders are first. However, you do it based on a thoughtful, informed basis. And early in our conversation, we talked about data-informed decisions. Being bold, just for the sake of being bold, is scary and dangerous.
right.
But analyzing data, looking into the future, asking the right questions, and developing a thoughtful strategy for success is not scary. It's exciting.
Yeah, I love it. Got to leave it there. That was so good. Thank you so much, Frank, for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. I know you got a lot going on at the club, and boy, it's been great to hear your perspective, and much appreciated.
Yeah, enjoy the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you find episodes like this helpful, be sure to share it and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're using. Until next time, keep crushing your club marketing.